Hi, my name is Shaye. Welcome to my YouTube channel where I discuss various topics. Based on the title, today I will be discussing death. Um, Death is not a lighthearted topic, even though I may smile or laugh in parts of this video, but it is something we will all encounter at some point in our lives. And inevitably, we will all die. So this little snippet is supposed to share three stories or three things I have learned about money through death, experiencing death, which would be loss of loved ones, in sudden and unexpected manners, and what that did to change my shifting and thinking around money and how I view money and how I plan for money. In hopes that again it's helpful to someone, I will start with I'm Nigerian. Nigerians don't like to talk about death. We don't like to discuss those topics for various reasons. Mostly, my culture can be very superstitious in that sometimes we believe what we speak into existence. And while to some extent I do believe that, I do think it's incredibly naive as mortal beings to not, acknowledge that death occurs. It happens, and we should plan for it. So this is not me casting death on anyone or speaking into that. Like, no, I'm not trying to draw on negative things. I'm more trying to reflect on the lessons I learned and things I wish I knew that hopefully can help someone who maybe has not yet experienced that kind of loss and they can prepare for it. While you can't plan everything that's going to happen around someone passing who's close to you, there are some things financially that if I had to do it again, maybe I'll do it differently. That's what this is about. So if you're interested, stick around. So, what has death taught me about money? A lot that I can't cover in one video. But the three things I've learned is you can plan before death. You can also plan for what happens when the death occurs. And you can plan for what happens after, the aftermath of death. So in my case specifically, I had my first very big loss of a loved one happened in my adult life, the year that I actually turned 30. I had a very tragic loss in my family, very sudden, um, rather traumatic, and was the first time I had to be part of planning someone's funeral arrangement. And as jarring and as emotionally challenging as that was, what I quickly realized, and it's something similar to when you hear people who get married talk about weddings, the sticker shock of a funeral. I I did not, and it's such a jarring thing because you're grieving, you're vulnerable, you're mourning, and if it's a loved one, you want to do everything. You want to make it a send off that seems fitting to how much you care about them. But then you get to the funeral home, and some of these funeral homes are very sophisticated. It's a whole business. I didn't realize. And you get the prices and you get the options, and you are just like, how are people paying for this? Especially, like I said, in my case, it wasn't someone who was later in life and maybe would have had a whole plan or will, right? This was very sudden and very unusual. So, all that to say, the first thing I learned is we oftentimes, when we think about death planning, we think about older people, we think about wills, we think about people who have inheritance, and that all is true. But we also leave out the fact that sometimes death planning is saving something for the inevitable event of a loss, right? I'm not saying save for the funeral of the young person you have, but sometimes I think putting things on paper. So, for example, in my case, where it was a young person who passed, by no means do I expect that person to have written out a plan for their lives, right? But what's interesting is I think if I had more open conversations amongst the group of people that that were impacted by this if we were more open about talking about loss and what life looks like and just having those conversations. What I hope would have come out of is maybe some insight on how that person would have wanted this circumstance handled for them specifically, right? Because what happens is when people pass, you are very vulnerable. You're very emotional. You start to go in overdrive to do all these planning events. And if you're anything like I said, I'm Nigerian. If you're from my culture, we do things, if you think it's over the top, we do it times 10, you know? And it adds up very quickly. And then when it's all said and done, you're still left with the loss and the grief, which is the more, in my opinion, severe impact of the death. That it begs the question, did you need all that hoopla to send them off? Especially if the person may not have even desired that hoopla. It would have been good to get insight. So, what I took away from that was if there was a way to be more open about death planning with younger people, not just the old and retired and on their way out, but like having more open conversations about having wills at different stage in your lives. And will doesn't always mean you're handing out substantial assets. Sometimes will is just instructions on how you want to be buried. What do you want your ceremony to look like? Instructions on how you want the people who are left behind to dispose of your things, because people don't talk about that enough. The burden of burying a loved one, and I can't count the amount of times I have met people who their loved one has passed, and then they're left with this heavy task of dismantling a whole home and getting rid of things and trying to decide how they would have wanted things to be handled. What did they want disposed versus donated? If you've amassed anything in this world and you will pass at some point and you are able to, even if it's as simple as writing a note that states this is how I would like these things handled and make one person you know and trust know where that thing is, I would recommend it. That was my first lesson. Then the second lesson, like I said, funerals are expensive. And I later learned some people actually have insurances and plans for these things. And like I said, in my culture, we don't talk about death. So I never even delved into that realm of financial planning for death. I didn't even touch it with a stick. It's like, what is that? But after going through one, I realized, holy crap, unless you're just wealthy, right? Unless you're just fortunate to be blessed, it is important to really think about the cost of your death and how you can, in all your life planning, your retirement planning, your wealth planning, that should be a conversation that gets woven into that. And it's not just the cost of funeral, it's like I said, it's the dismantling of your life. It's the dismantling of your asset. It's what are you leaving behind? What kind of, liabilities are you leaving behind for people to have to resolve? Is there a way you can minimize the impact of that? Or again, leave clear instructions on how you want things handled. That, again, I don't think is discussed enough, is there is just an extensive impact of someone leaving that we really, again, from no one likes to talk about death, it's not a great topic, that we could do a better job of just easing the burden on the people who have to come after by just having upfront conversations. Or they're experts you can hire. They're actually people you can hire who can lay it out. If it's too emotional or too problematic for you to do yourself, there are people you can hire. Give them a general sense of what you would like. They can draft documents and give you instructions on how to get things planned. But yeah, I think the financial burden of death was the second lesson I learned in terms of like not just the financial burden of a funeral, but the whole thing about someone's life on this earth and how to navigate that when they're no longer here made me start thinking about planning for myself. It really was my aha, like I need to make sure this doesn't become a thing when I leave. And the last thing is the grieving process. So you've done the funeral, you've dismantled the assets, you've liquidated stuff, everyone who came to help has helped you, and they've left, and you are left with the emotional consequence of this loss. That part is another part that there is a financial impact in that. And it's again, I smile, but it's not pretty, right? That's the ugliest part of death is grief, because grief can go on for. I mean, it doesn't really go away. If you've ever experienced it, it just gets more manageable. But the type of assistance you require, oftentimes, when you're dealing with heavy grief, like if you need counseling, if you need extended time away from work and you don't want to financially be burdened with that, if you need, I don't know, to relocate, if you, there's just so much you could require, right, to be able to survive grief. And when you are financially struggling or unable to even barely pay for the funeral, everything I've just listed is luxuries that you won't even consider. And you would just mentally have to psych yourself to get back in the routine of things, to get back in work. And I have to say, I've been in that position and inevitably it catches up to you. And so the only way, again, I know to plan for it is when we're talking about our savings and other, there's gotta be a component of a cushion for the just in case, you know? If I need to take, say, 6 additional months off work and my employer only gives, I don't know what it is it 3 months of coverage for this type of loss? Can I financially afford it, you know? And if I, for example, need to just be able to walk away from that job for a while, just because it's too much for me to even think of work and think of grieving. Can I afford it? Can I plan for it? You know, I can I get additional insurance for it? These are the conversations again I wish we would openly have and be honest about how we feel and be honest about what we don't know, because as I'm speaking I am actively learning it. But the version of me a decade ago who was planning the first funeral had no idea what was happening, how it was going to be covered, what was going to come before, after, and during. And now in hindsight, I realize we put too much emphasis on death as it pertains to older people or people who are chronically ill or there's a clear exit versus just regular people who we know, hey, we are mortal beings. If I walk out my house today, this might be it. I have no say on the end date. So why is that not part of my active planning? And why is a taboo and scare topic that we don't want to touch? But like at some point, all of us are going to leave, but we don't know when. We hope to be here forever, but stats show that we're not all going to be here for ever or for the longest term. So those are my lesson about death and money, and just thought I'd share and see. And if you are going through some loss of some sort, truly, I really empathize with you. And all I can say is, in my experience, it just takes time. It takes time. It takes patience with yourself. It takes knowing, yeah, your view of things are going to shift, and life's going to look a bit different for a while. And it may never go back to what it was like before, but you will find a new version of life that you can live with. So I hope this was helpful. This is this week's addition to the money series, and we will see what next week brings. I hope you all have a nice week, and bye.